to understand what civil services are all about. So, when you join the civil services, you are basically going to be a generalist. You're not going to be a specialist. So, you won't be a cardiac surgeon operating on hearts. You won't be an engineer building bridges or a nuclear scientist working on atomic power plants. You're going to be a journalist and you can be head of a department which actually makes bridges or be the medical secretary of a state or the government of India. And therefore, what the civil services exam tend to look at is your awareness, your general awareness of your surroundings, of what is happening around you, what are the latest developments, whether you're interested in knowing about little more about them, and so on and so forth, which is why the paper is called General Studies. And there's so much studies, so much stress, both in the prelims and in the main exam on general studies. So the key thing is that they're testing your awareness, your curiosity, your absorption, your ability to coordinate, look behind a story, etc. Now, that means that no amount of mugging is going to help you. No amount of learning by rote is going to help you. So those of you who are taking the civil services exam for the first time or still thinking of taking it, my first piece of advice is that actually start reading your newspapers very carefully. And by newspapers, I don't mean the Delhi supplement or the Bombay supplement or the Ranchi supplement. You have to read the main newspapers rather, and try to see what are the items which might become questions. So it's not always the headline items which will get you questions. There may be snippets which will get you questions. So there may be a little write-up about, the other day there was a little write-up in Times of India about the reducing crime rates in India. Now that's something that you should really try to absorb, because that's a kind of question that can be asked. Or if there's an item about Chandrayaan, that's when you should start asking yourself what question can be asked. So I have a fair guess that there would be a question on space this year, but it won't be about Chandrayaan-U directly, because that you can memorize. They won't be testing your memory. So they'll test your curiosity, your ability to look behind the story and to absorb it. So there might be a question about, say, India's first independent satellite, or there may be a question about a mission on Mars, or what is the latest mission being planned by the NASA and European Space Agency to bring back rocks from Mars. So there will be a question about space, but it will not be directly about Chandrayaan-2. So, and that is the problem that most students face, that they tend to go to coaching centers, or they tend to go on online series, or they tend to find one fat book and try to memorize it. But that's not sufficient. All these can only be guides to what you should look at. And that is your intelligence, to be able to figure out what are the items which can actually raise a question in the exam, and what is the kind of question that will be asked around it. So I might broadly call it linkages to the main issue which is being reported. You have to be aware of that. So look at every newspaper item you see and have a genuine curiosity about it. Again, to take the example of space, so our first satellite was the Aryabhat. They may not ask you about what the first space satellite was. They may ask you about who Aryabhat was and why is he famous. So that's the curiosity part. A civil servant's ability really lies in being aware of what's happening around him, being able to then coordinate what is happening around him, ask questions about why it is happening, to synthesize those thoughts and take a decision. And the examination preparation is, in some senses, very similar to this process. So you have to, be aware, then you need to be able to absorb, synthesize, and see whether you can give a cogent reply to a question around that subject. This is the major piece of advice, that the exam I refuse to believe that the examination is very tough, because it's not tough for those people who are actually alive to the situation around you. So all the books and the coaching centers that students have nowadays were not even available at our time, so many of them. And during our time, actually going to a coaching center was considered to be not fashionable, what we used to call infra dig. So because we were all reading newspapers, we were not distracted by television, we were not distracted by the mobile phones, and we were reading magazines, we were reading international magazines, we were participating in quizzes, sports quizzes, journal quizzes. So that is the kind of awareness that all of you need to develop now, all the aspiring civil servants need to develop now and concentrate on.